from all over the world. You are coming from all over the world, from Asia, from Africa, from Europe, from the United States. Hello to all of you. Keep joining, and as definitely the right webinar. Thank you. As you join, please put in the chat questions that you have. What does the impact of heat does for you? What does it make you think of? What does it do to your schools, to the schools in your community, to the students you know, to the students you do not know? What are questions that research should answer? What are solutions that you know of or that you want to know of? Please put all that in the chat, and our distinguished speakers will try to answer them. And if we cannot answer them today, we'll answer them later. So I would invite you to do this. Just put your name in and put questions in, and we will have time to answer them, hopefully, at the end of this webinar. I am joined here by three wonderful experts who will be sharing their knowledge and perspectives on the impact of heat on education and adaptation and mitigation programs. First, I will introduce myself because I start talking first, and I'm Yolande Miller-Granvaux. I'm with FHI 360, and I have the honor of having started this network with other culprits who are in the room from FHI 360 and from over 45 other organizations. So it's a pleasure to be here. What we want to do with this webinar is we want to learn and we want to know more specifically about heat and education. And we really want to bridge the gap between research and solutions, research and implementation. So that's why we are here. The challenge of heat is now. It's not tomorrow. It was yesterday. It's not the future. It's now. So we are eager to get started and begin this conversation. So first, I'm going to ask each of our panelists to introduce themselves and answer the first question. And I'll start with Aron. Who are you and why are you working on the intersection of education and climate change? Aron.
Good morning, or good afternoon, or good evening, wherever folks are. I'm Aron Walker. I'm a graduate student at the University of California, Los Angeles. I used to be a Peace Corps volunteer in Tanzania, which is where I first encountered this concern about heat in schools. Tanzania is not exceptionally hot, and we'll learn about places that are today. But it was hot enough for me to start thinking about, wow, this is impacting learning. How do we study this? How do we mitigate this? And so I've been thinking about that for a while.
Thank you. Shripathi.
Yes, yeah, great to be here. I'm Shripathi. I'm from Restless Development, sitting in Bangalore here in India, but work with our teams here in India, Tanzania, Sierra Leone, and a few other hubs, what we call as hubs as well. For me, I think both personally, even from Restless Development perspective, I mean, we work a lot on climate change, but especially on the heat, especially on education. I think it's really affecting the fundamental way in which children or young people are learning. I mean, I think Aron just touched upon Tanzania, but I've seen some of the conditions where temperatures go beyond 45 degrees Celsius, and which Bhavna, Ben also can bring in. So I think for me, it's really the most fundamental problem today that we need to really address. So I think it can't be a better place than I think all of us being here and talking about it. So yeah.
Thank you, Shripathi. And Bhavna?
Hi and namaste. I'm Bhavna from Mahila Housing Trust. I have been working with Mahila Housing Trust past 23 years, and I oversee the energy and climate change projects here. Of course, because I am living in the hottest state of India in Gujarat, and of course, because we work with grassroots communities and they contribute very less, but they affect the impact a lot. That is why we have focused on heat stress. Thank you.
Thank you. So what the experts we have here are amazing, because Aron has been spending the last few years doing all the research on heat and education, and you going to have a synthesis of what we know about it. This is in his brain, all the data that we have available right now. on heat and education. Shripathi and Bhavna are working on the solutions. They have seen what works. They have seen what can be scaled up. And not only have they seen it, but they're doing it. They're implementing it. So this bridge between what we know, data, evidence, research, and implementation is what we're looking at now. So now let's just start. Aron will start and will guide us through the research of what we know. Aron, the floor is yours.
Thanks so much. Good again to see you all. A reminder, sort of, thinking about, and I think many of you are familiar with many of the contexts where we really care about heat. Some of the research happens in, classrooms in the US that may or may not turn on the air conditioning, but we're really thinking about places where, the classroom maybe has windows, there's probably no glass, have like a metal roof, no insulation. And so classrooms that are particularly vulnerable to outdied environmental conditions. So keep that in mind as we proceed through this. All right, let's go to the next slide. So my job is sort of to share a few. These are the things that we sort of know about heat in schools, and then I want to share some things that we don't know that seem particularly pressing, and maybe we'll learn about later today. 3 big points I want to make here. One is that we have really good evidence that heat degrades human productivity, it degrades cognition. We'll sort of talk some of the evidence for that. We then have pretty good evidence that heat causes students to test worse on the day of the test. So if it's really hot when they take their test, they do worse. We have evidence for that, nice narrow studies. And then we also have evidence that when the whole year is hot or a place is hot, students learn less. And we have and then there's a few other sort of non-cognitive effects we see, and there's some emerging evidence for that. And so we'll talk through what that evidence is, and both to show what it is that sort of formal academic studies can show us, and also how much there is that many of us know anecdotally or experientially that we don't yet have really good data for in the formal literature. And maybe we can think all about how to start bridging that. So let's go to the next slide here. So you all have probably seen these estimates already. People are concerned about heat's effect on labor productivity. A lot of this impact is in outdoor workers and agriculture. This is sort of the range of estimates we see by end of century, and we have impacts now, but by end of century are on order of 1.5% to 4% of global GDP, caused by decreases in worker productivity or in the ability or safety of people to work under extreme conditions. And those numbers, those of you that work with GDP numbers know that, 2-3% of GDP is huge. So there's reason to be concerned about this. And it's not just sort of outdoor physical labor. We see impacts on what the human brain can do as well. There's a lovely study out of Indonesia that compared workers doing similar things under sun conditions and shade conditions. Not a big difference in air temperature, but shade makes a big difference in sort of the way humans experience heat and what they can do. They found an 8% decrease in labor productivity just in a short period of time. But they also did some cognitive studies. They had people work on some problems after their work shift and found there was a decrease in their cognitive performance as well. So this gets us starting to worry a bit about, what might be happening to, students and other people who are cognitive workers as well. And there's good research on looking at that under laboratory conditions. So we test out what people can do with their brain and we change the temperature and see what happens. And there's a meta review that shows that there are impacts, clearly. There's a range of impacts depending on how they're measured, but we seem to see the largest impacts on tasks that require attention, things like the authors point out, reading comprehension and math, which, is a lot of what students do in school. And so there's reason to be concerned just on sort of the theoretical side of impacts on learning, impacts on testing, impacts on other things happening in schools, which again enforces what we see on the ground. Next slide, please. There's one of my sort of favorite experimental studies in this regard is 60 years old. This happened at the research school in Lenox, Iowa. And they built the school with 2 identical classrooms, and they have 2 as identical as they could student class populations in each one. And in one classroom, they sort of theoretically determined the best thermal conditions, and they set the classroom there, and they let the other one do whatever the outside was doing in response. And then they looked at how well students learned basic classroom tasks. And they found for 10 out of 10 tasks, the students that had good thermal comfort learn them all better. So that's sort of some of the old experimental evidence for this. This is not a study that we can, replicate at scale, but this sort of, so the next literature we'll get into talks about how we look at this over, in other places and in much larger scales. But again, there's some even classroom experimental evidence on this front. Next slide. So there's several studies that look at the impact of student test performance on hot days. And so how performance of students on, usually these are really high stakes exams, college entrance exams, for example, and how the temperature usually outside and in the environment is correlated with students' performance on those tests. And a little technical note here, there's a challenge in comparing these studies internationally because, if a student does, like students do 4 points better, what does that mean, we might ask, and it's different on different tests. And so often the way these get compared is by looking at changes relative to the standard distribution of results on the tests. So I think that's something familiar to many of you. If not, the scores of students, they'll have some average, they'll be distributed around that average, and the standard deviation is a measure of how far they spread. And so we compare these different studies by looking at how many standard deviations of performance do we see being affected by each additional degree of temperature. So there are 2 studies here from the US. There's one from Vietnam. That one's college entrance exams. It's the math exam. And they're all showing negative effects. So each degree Celsius hotter it is outside, student performance is going down. And these values they're finding are relatively similar, which gives us a little more confidence about them. Looking at them, they seem a little small, right? This is 1, 2, 3% of a standard deviation. That doesn't seem like a big sort of catastrophic effect. But 2 notes on that. One, that's per degree. And so we have places that are 10 degrees, 20 degrees hotter than ideal conditions. And that really starts to add up. And also, these are high stakes exams taken by tens, hundreds of thousands, millions of students. And so, even a small impact at the margin is still going to mean 1,000, 10,000 students who would have passed are now failing. And that has life-altering consequences about being able to continue in school or to go to college. And so we're concerned about issues of equity that could be unfair. It was hot on your day. I'm sorry you failed. But also, it's just a loss of human potential and talent. So there's still evidence here that we should be concerned. Next slide, please. We are also interested in if there are cumulative effects. So if students test worse on a particular day because it's hot outside, we're concerned about the opportunities that might be denied to them. But what I think we really care about is if things are hot over the whole year, are they going to learn less? And so there are a few studies that look at that, looking at sort of conditions over the year and seeing if there's a relationship with how students perform at the end of that year. 2 I want to highlight. One is by Park et al. And they did sort of this global comparative study. They're seeing, again, effects on a per day over 80 degrees Fahrenheit, which, again, many of you know, 80 degrees Fahrenheit could be the norm. That could be a cool day. So this range of impacts could go much higher. And they have a particularly clever aspect of this study where they look at effects from high temperatures on school days versus not school days. That's that figure here in the pink. And what they found was that when school days are hot, there's the learning loss at the end of the year is associated with that, but not with non-school days, which gives us evidence that it's really about temperature conditions when school is in session that might be affecting student performance. There's a great study here from India. This is Garg et al. And they come to similar quantitative findings. So again, when there are more days that are hot over a similar threshold, these values are 10 times bigger because it's per unit of 10 days. They're also seeing decreases in sort of end of year student performance. So all of this suggests that there's also a heat impact on learning, not just on day of test performance. The other aspect of this Garg study that I want to emphasize is that when they implemented it's the National Rural Employment Guarantee Program, the effects of this were attenuated somewhat, about 38%, which suggests that there are ways that social support systems can help mitigate the impacts of heat on learning. It also suggests that there are impacts outside the classroom on agricultural productivity, which affects income, which affects what families can do, which affects student learning. So there are many pathways here, which makes the study difficult. I think there's evidence that it's both in-school effects and also larger economic effects. Next slide, please. We're nearing the end of the formal literature on this topic. So this is where it's really exciting that many people are excited about this. I'm hoping there will be more studies and more data soon. I want to highlight two working papers, which are sort of like where the frontier of academia can be. These are two studies that look at non-cognitive effects. One found, again, this is in US urban schools, that there was an increase in disciplinary issues and an increase in student absences as days got hotter that was unaffected by whether or not the schools had, well, the attendance was not affected by whether schools had air conditioning, but the discipline issues were. So again, that shows us that students are going to respond in ways that decrease their opportunities for learning, and not just because it's too hot to learn. There's another study from India that shows that teacher absences increase significantly as the temperature rises. And so we're looking at ways that the whole education system might be threatened by increasing temperatures. Next slide, please. That sort of takes us to the things that we don't know. There's lots of things we don't know. These are three questions that I think are really important that I hope maybe we get some insight in later today, or that maybe all of us together in collaboration can try to figure out. One is that most of these studies happen in temperature ranges that are lower than the most extreme places, the most extreme schools. And so I really worry about what happens sort of beyond the graph, right? What's happening in places where it's 40 Celsius, 45 Celsius? What are the impacts there? They're probably worse than linear. And so we need to get some more information, some more data on that to see how big these impacts are on learning, on student well-being, whatnot. We also, obviously, a lot of learning happens outside of school. Students do homework, they study, and those conditions are not well documented. So, what is their transportation like to school? We know that when workers are in the fields and they get really hot and then they try to do cognitive tasks, they don't do as well. Well, if students are on a hot bus to or from school, or they're walking in the sun, and then they're going to study for their exams, that might have a really big impact also. So out of school interventions for youth might also be really important. And we need a lot more data to clarify what those conditions are and how we might improve them. And then, of course, the big question for all of us is, what do we do? It's not particularly helpful to hear that, well, things are bad. So what are interventions that we can do at scale in the places that are most impacted to mitigate these impacts on learning? And I'm really hopeful that we'll hear some of those ideas later today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Aron. We have 4 or 5 minutes for clarification questions on the research to Aron. So please, either you can come on, on the live or in the chat. I have one question for Aron, and we've talked about this before. The little bit of research that we have, and you pointed to the fact that we don't know much, tends to be conducted by economists. So what does that mean? Why do you think that is, and what does that mean? To what extent does it hide other potential research pathways?
I think that's a great question. I think part of the reason is that economists have really powerful tools for doing these studies. So I think there's a lot of good reason for that. I think also they're pretty good at building models that look at different possible impacts and testing hypotheses about causality. And we're interested in those kind of questions. I think what I always wonder, because I've been a K-12 teacher for a long time. What is actually happening in classrooms, and like how are people responding to that, and how do we look at those behaviors, and how do we quantify that? And I think that's where the more partnership we can have between the people who are really excited about like looking at data and analyzing it, and the people who really know what is happening in this classroom. Like, what are we seeing? What are students doing? Are they late? Are they tired? Are there certain behaviors? Are there certain adaptations that work? Are they all sitting on like one side of the room? Are there, getting like those sort of insights, I think will really help power these studies. I think that's part of it. And again, that's what I hope that, we can do through a network like Green, is to build those linkages to have a more complete understanding of what's happening and what we can do about it.
Great, thank you. Is there Any evidence about different effects on students related to age, gender? This is a question from Estelle from World Education.
Thanks, Yolande. Yeah, you stated my question perfectly.
Thank you.
That's a really good question. I think that's a really important area to look at. I think that we could imagine it in different ways. It's a little bit hard, the comparisons, because our tools for assessing impact look a little bit different. What are the exams? What are the impacts? I have not seen gender disaggregation for these. And age, again, is tricky because the kind of metrics we have are harder to compare. College entrance exams versus, mid-high school exams versus primary school exams. But everything I've seen has impacts across all ages. So we do see those impacts.
Thank you. Mariana, do you want to ask a question? Mariana asked a
Hi.
question. Okay, go ahead. Go ahead,
Hi,
Mariana.
good morning. Hi.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Erin, for that wonderful presentation. No, I was just wondering if this information or data has informed governments and if they have taken action to make some changes in their countries. Thank you, Erin.
I think that's a good and important question. I know there's a lot of work. I'm based at the University of California, Los Angeles. There's a lot of work that's happening in the state of California right now, trying to think about what laws, what policies, what programs, what funding sources can protect students, both in classrooms and on playgrounds. There's a lot of that work that's being pioneered out of UCLA. So we're starting to see that. I haven't seen a sort of coordinated global response to heat, but here we all are, a group of people around the world thinking about this. So I think that this is something that we should be thinking about how to do.
Thank you, Aaron. Candice from Jamaica also asked previously the impact on girls and because of and especially on period poverty. So I know we don't address that, but it's still the issue of gender that comes up. And I was just wondering, like the research you presented, so none of them are gender disaggregated, the ones you looked at? Or talk about the impact on early marriage or early pregnancy or?
This, I think, is always the challenge with studies that have environmental variables affecting student academic performance, which is that there are so many routes of impact that we really care about. And so I think that and then as we disaggregate, the population into smaller groups, it gets like our power for seeing effects gets smaller, but there still could be real effects there. So I think that's where it's helpful for people who have insight into particular mechanisms. I think this is a really important mechanism that's been studied not in like the heat context, but in other contexts about access to water, to think about what is a way that we can ask this question, that we can get some really good information on it to see. So, and that's where we have to think about like what's the design of the study that will let us show that is the mechanistic pathway. But I'd be really excited about thinking about how do we show that? And your particular example is a great one. We can see, is there differential performance by gender? And is that difference by gender different based on water access in schools? That's a cool study.
Yeah, thank you. You all, what is striking here is the small amount of data that is available. We see a lot of data on the impact of climate change on health, but then so what are the implications for education? And we don't see that. There's very little investment in education at the intersection of education, climate change in terms of research. And I'm so glad that that we see what exists and what what we don't have. So thank you, Aaron. So we have, I feel hot just thinking about all these issues. So we're going to go to Bangalore with Shripathi, who works for Restless Development in India. And Shripathi, the floor is yours. This is all about solutions, what we see works.
Yeah, thanks. No, thanks so much. I think it's a nice segue of I think Aaron, you ended it with what we don't know, but I think there's brilliant implementations and innovations are being done on the ground, and none other than probably, I think, there won't be a sort of better organization than Mahila Housing Trust, or MHT, who are based in Ahmedabad, to sort of really to talk about it. Bhavna, if you want to turn on the video and while I just give an introduction. So So I think, taking a step back, especially for implementers, for organizations who are working on the ground to really implement solutions on reducing the heat stress, making the schools more climate resilient, and really, I think, making access better for children in some of the situations where Bhavna Ben is right now sitting. So in Ahmedabad, where the summer temperatures go beyond 45 degrees Celsius, and if you're sitting in a classroom with a tin roof, with a metal roof, the temperatures go easily more than 55, 54, 55 degrees Celsius. And I mean, forget learning, just to sit inside a classroom, it becomes, I mean, to say in a very blunt way, really hellish. So MHT and some of the organizations on the ground, not just in India, I'm sure, I think in parts of Africa and Latin America and other places as well, where very innovative solutions are being done. Where the interesting part here, I just want to sort of tell everyone here is it's not just about that one particular innovation you do it on the school's roof or school infrastructure. It's also how do you address the situation overall? Because when we're talking about heat stress in school, it's also affecting a community. It might have created a drought in the community, which affects the livelihood or agriculture aspect. I think I saw a good question in the question answer session, question section as well, where someone is asking about the connection with agriculture. Brilliant. Because right now we are talking about situations where families migrate because they don't have their livelihoods, really being, getting impacted because of the increased heat and climate change. Now we are talking about, addressing these issues in schools as well. So MHT and some of these organizations, what they're doing is they're really addressing the challenge in a very ecosystem approach, where they are not only putting the solution in a school, a sustainable infrastructure, a green solution on the school, but also addressing the communities, also addressing the livelihoods of the communities so that the families actually stay in the place. They have better livelihood opportunities. Women are empowered so that their children, their kids can actually go to school and they are not really, migrating and leave the places because of extreme heat and other aspects. So with that in context, I'd like to invite, Bhavna Ben, who, as she said, she's been with MHT over 23 years right now, which is, I think it's a huge experience that you have it in the field. Just a sort of quick question to start with, Bhavna Ben. So why does, MHT and your team looks at climate change, heat stress, its impact on education? What's the main reason, and how did you start it, and where you just a sort of brief introduction about that?
Okay. Actually, slum settlements are located in very most vulnerable low-lying areas, get flooded easily. Living in settlements typically like lack of drainage, lack of sewerage, poor quality of housing, and even very less ventilation affect a lot. Just because of that, they are most vulnerable for heat stress. Why we are focusing on schools? Because we have seen that many Anganwadis, we call Anganwadi small schools, located in slum settlements itself. These children are vulnerable in their home also, and parallelly in school also, because they have to go school 8 hours or 6 hours, and after that they have to study in their home. So their home, the design and the material is most vulnerable, and that is why we like to work on heat stress and mainly on climate change, because climate change is very broad. Of course, everyone is affected by climate change, but we focus because of just grassroots communities, because they contribute very less and they affect a lot.
No, thanks so much. I think you touched upon a point which Aaron also, put in his research component is children, the exposed to heat is not just in schools, but also when they go out of the schools in the communities. So I think it's MHT. Maybe I can just share the screen now if it's possible. But I know that MHT works with the communities and even the community housing, where you're building, sustainable infrastructure and heat resilient housing for communities as well. That's brilliant. So in this way, what's happening right now, with even when the kids go home, they're not exposed to heat as well, because there is an infrastructure already, which is sustainable, which is heat resilient. Just going forward, if you can just talk about, because I think we saw the whole sort of idea of research, what has happened, and I think Aaron talked about the impact on test scores, impact on their learning abilities, etc. But we also have some amazing solutions done on the ground. So Bhavna, if you can take a couple of minutes and explain about an innovation that has actually happened where you implemented in these marginalized schools in extreme heat temperatures, extreme heat conditions. How did the process happen? What was the solution? How did you do the innovation? And also, if you can really touch upon the process of it, because I can share the screen and probably show the pictures as well. It was not that MHD just went in and put that school. No, you interacted with the communities, you involved with the communities in designing the solution and co-created and co-implemented it. So if you can just talk about taking that example of the school in Ahmedabad or anyone that you want to take, and just take us through the process, how it was implemented and what was the solution.
As already Shripathi ji, you already mentioned about, because we take the decision like collectively. If we have to do some kind of intervention in schools, then of course we will do like discussion with their teachers, their principals, the students, and even then the school assistant person, because based on their need we design the we do the layout and designing. Of course, we have piloted, we have demonstrated different kind of cool roof technologies like modular roof, solar reflective white paint, bamboo roof, even puff panel. Also, we have demonstrated in one of the tribal district of Gujarat. There also we have piloted. And the other technology called Covestro, it's made by like Agrovest. So this kind of technology we have already demonstrated. And the thing is, we never do the validation of the technology. As per our practice, if we have demonstrated puff panel in one of the school in Ahmedabad city, we generally put data logger there. Before data collection also we train the children actually how to take the data, how to do the data collection before intervention, and after intervention they themselves validate the technology actually. And this is our SOP, because Mahila Housing Trust does technology intervention demonstration, but they never do the validation. Always validation is done by the beneficiaries.
Brilliant. So I think you really touched upon some of the things that Aron was talking about, the data. Aron, if you sort of, what she said was they just don't implement the solution, but also put the data loggers to really understand how the temperature has, decreased in the schools. Maybe I think we already see a bridge that we can build here with these solutions. And Aron, we are talking about, I think you said beyond the graph, like really, we are talking about 45, 46, 47 degrees Celsius temperatures. And through this intervention, the temperatures drastically reduce. And it really creates that sort of, environment for children to come and learn. Thanks, Bhavna. I think it was very interesting that it's not that you really don't go and implement a solution, the school. I hope I can show the pictures. Yes, I think I'm able to now, just to show examples for all the, the audience that got here. So this is the solution that, Bhavna, when we're talking about just now. So this is the sort of the school, as you can see here, it's not a regular, just a very four-wall school with no ventilation, like the urban school that you look at. But this is an actual solution that MHD did with a lot of innovation that she was talking about. And just to sort of show very briefly what she was explaining was, if you can see these pictures here, the design process is, I think it's very interesting, which sometimes really gets lost in the whole, documentation process. So going beyond all the technical parts, if you can see here, the discussion design actually happens with the communities and committees. And then you actually have the communities coming in and involving in the whole, sort of the process. So the whole process happens in a very organic manner. And if you look at how it was before, the condition of the school, you can imagine that the changes that must have happened here. So this is how some of the infrastructure that you could look at. And I think there was so this was the school, that's how it was. Just a tin roof, and with some of the shades here, and the temperatures really, and as you can see here, it's, forget, I think, air conditions and artificial and active cooling. We don't even have a proper sort of, space here. So what MSD, as Bhavna was talking about, they went with the very community-led approach. Okay, there is an issue. You have kids coming here from the communities where heat stress it's insanely high. Then let's co-create a solution and build something together. So as you can see, I mean, as I showed the pictures of how they all came together and sort of, did the whole sort of construction together. And in the end, you have something like this. So, and also it's done in a manner because, Ahmedabad as a city, there is a certain wind movement that happens in different seasons. Summers, it gets really hot. And wind also blows in a certain situation because before monsoon, they have a certain set of monsoon wind coming in. So this is done in such a manner that the ventilation is also very contextualized. So, I mean, just looking at some of these, and you can see how communities also involved in it. And also, I think other interesting thing that happens in some of these schools, I'm sure there are plenty of these in Africa as well, is where this place becomes a very community, sort of community gathering place. Now you have a place in a village, in a place where the infrastructure actually helps the temperature to reduce. Now this becomes a very happening place where, as you can see, a lot of community people coming in, and even Diwali sort of lights are being lit up as well. So this, I think, was a great example of how heat stress is being addressed. I think overall climate change is being addressed in some of these very marginalized schools. Maybe Yolande, do I have a couple of minutes, or should we go for the question answer session? Otherwise, I would probably ask like just one more question to Bhavna then.
Yes, you have time.
Oh, great. Thank you.
Please.
Yeah. So the other question, I sort of, Bhavna, when I wanted to just check with you was, now you did go with a very ecosystem approach, you said. You went with the communities, different stakeholders. But while implementing this, what were some of the challenges? Because for, as Aron was talking about from the research angle, now if you want to connect some of this research into an implementation, or really implementation in scale, we really have to understand what were some of the challenges. So if you can just talk about what were some of the challenges that you sort of faced while implementing such amazing solutions on the ground.
First, I would like to say that MHT generally it's MHT strategy that whenever we do intervention, there should be some kind of contribution from the beneficiary side. Then only they will feel their ownership. And if they feel their ownership, then definitely they will maintain also. Because after a technology intervention, many times it happen, who will do the maintenance? If we will provide free of cost, then nobody will take care of the technology. So it's MHT strategy to take some kind of contribution. So the big challenge is because I would like to say that MHT is not only doing the cool roof interventions, we also provide some kind of passive cooling options also. In challenges, these kind of technologies should be on subsidized rate. There should be some policy, because in Ahmedabad, if I would like to give an example of PMAY scheme, public Pradhan Mantri Mukhyamantri Awas Yojana scheme. In that scheme, whatever the vertical buildings are going to construct, there is a law. There should be, the building should have it's a very technical, maybe Aron can understand, otherwise because it's very technical, I also can't explain about the RETV value. It's a ECBC code, Energy Conservation Building Code. So government is constructing new buildings, but there is no implementation of that ECBC code. ECBC code is directly linked with the thermal comfort, because the housing designs are, there should be a cross ventilation, there should be a chhajja, there should be some kind of glasses, but all these parameters is not going to implement in this current scheme. Same way in Anganwadi also, because if I remember recently we had designed one Anganwadi. Actually government provide the estimate 7 lakh rupees for each Anganwadi, but if you have to construct a properly thermally comfort Anganwadi, then the estimate will go to around 10 lakh rupees. So there should be the government should understand and should take this kind of they should do the policy influence for this kind of Anganwadis or this kind of suggestions.
No, thanks so much. Just for, I think, viewers to understand better, Anganwadi are early childhood learning centers that you see here, I think, the example I've shown here. So government has, I mean, we are talking about like real scale here. Each of the state here in India, if you take India as an example, we have tens and thousands of these early learning childhood centers, which are spread across some of the very heat stress situations across different states in India. Now, what I think Bhavna was talking about was, so one of the challenges is, how do we really, if we want to, I mean, of course you can bring in innovation in 1 or 2 schools, and Aron, we spoke about some of those, some of the specific examples, and you, I think, nicely mentioned about this example of having 2 identical classrooms, which is not scalable. But if we really want to look at a solution which is scalable, it has to have a channel like government, which then comes in and says, okay, if we are building the early childhood learning center next time, we are going to consider these thermal, sustainable materials in built environment that you see here. So one other interesting thing which might have got sort of lost in the conversation, which I'm going to end it up after this, is when MHT works on these solutions, it's not just the building infrastructure that they go and build, infrastructure using construction materials. They also work on innovations on, can we, as I think she mentioned about the passive cooling, but also can we innovate in building materials? So maybe that may not be the expertise of MHT, but then they partner with organizations and startups and others who bring in those innovations as well. Can we bring in solar? Because some of the areas we're talking about here, which I'm sure there will be a lot of parallels in sub-Saharan Africa and southern other parts of Asia as well, is where we don't have 24/7 electricity, and some of them are not even connected to grids. So how do we, when you're building a solution, how do you already make the school a green school? How do you bring in sustainable solutions like solar panels? Like there are brilliant decentralized energy solutions that MHT has worked on, where summer, too hot sun, you have a solar panel to run the fans in school. So there are, these decentralized solutions which also contribute and complement into the already, brilliantly built some of these schools as well. So I think it's a beautiful example of ecosystem approach where all the different stakeholders, from policymakers to communities to schools to education ministries and children, everyone coming together. At the same time, you also bring in local innovators, local incubators, because you need local enterprises, local technicians to come and work. Bhavna Ben or her staff cannot go and build this. You need local masonry. You need local masons who are experts. You need local electricians to bring this together. So it really sort of brings the environment or an ecosystem where everything, it creates that sort of local, rich local environment for people to come in together and build these solutions. So yeah, I think this is an example, and there are many examples that MHT can bring in, even some of the organizations like this bring together. But I think I'll stop here with this couple of examples. But thank you so much, Bhavna Ben. I think hopefully, I think we take these inspiring solutions to scale across, the similar situations and contexts as well. So yeah.
This is fabulous. And we have a number of great questions. One is, I'm going to try to consolidate some of them. One is for policy and regulations and the role of local governments. You start touching on it, Shripathi and Bhavna, but what are municipalities doing? Because it is an ecosystem and they have to support it. Can you talk about planning by the local and national authorities to implement regulations and policies that will support and sustain these effective solutions?
So, do you want to come in, Bhavna Ben? Then I'll come in. Okay, I'll go first. So I think what we have learned, Ilan, Aron, and team, I'm sure I think Bhavna Ben also can vouch for it, is these municipalities and local governments, they want to see a proven solution, a pilots. So the CSOs, I think we have a great responsibility here to do. What we have done, some of the organizations here, is you put up a few successful pilots, bring them, invite them, and ask them, look, this is the difference, Aron, the data. We have the data logger. We have kids and teachers talking about it. Here is an example. Now take it up, run with it, and scale it. So obviously, I think the best way to really influence or really make this policymakers and municipalities to take it up scale is, and I'm probably not very sure about some of the local governance structures in other parts of the world, but in India, all of these very hyper local governance structures, they have budgets allocated for them, for education, for health, for livelihoods, etc. Now, if Bhavna Ben and her team goes to a very sort of rural Gujarat or urban Ahmedabad and say that, okay, look, we have done this in the school. Do you want to try it out in your own municipality? Now, suddenly, this municipality decision maker, whoever, because he or she is also looking at their next 5 years of election. Now, here is a proven example, and I have X amount of rupees or dollars or whatever with me. Let's scale it up. I want to do 10 in my constituency. So how do you actually make this happen is where we really need to work with the municipality, because it's not that they don't want to do it, but they want to do something which is scalable, which is replicable, and without much of their headache, things need to move fast. But Bhavna Ben, if you want to add anything, I'm sure you have more insights.
You have already answered, Shripathi ji.
Terrific. And on to expand this, to what extent are community members replicating these designs for their own housing? Or to Aaron's point about studying at home, can you talk about that too? That the community, how, what impact it has on community, basically.
So I think
Shripathi ji, can you just translate? Can you again ask me?
sure. I think that Bhavna, if you can talk about now, you touched upon in your conversation on how you also work with community housing, right?
Okay.
So if you can talk about some of the larger impact you have seen with your work on communities as well, because you build the community housing with addressing heat stress. So if you want to just touch upon, apart from education, on livelihoods, how it has impacted on their daily, they live in those houses, they sleep in those houses. So how it has impacted the communities at large through your work on working on this some of the sustainable infrastructure projects.
I think Shripathi ji, this question I would like to speak in. I mean, give you answer in Hindi because it's very difficult. So जो पीपी की ये PMAY के जो घर बनते हैं ना, उसमें ये होता है कि उनका जो क्रॉस वेंटिलेशन जो होना चाहिए उस तरीके से नहीं होता है. We have already done the survey because before they were in horizontal slums. Once they will move to vertical slums, their electricity consumption increase around 30%. That survey we have already, that research we have already done, because after moving to vertical buildings, they most invest, they do investment in that particular like electronic appliances, like they start using geyser, air conditioner, even this TV, some, because in slum settlements they many, I think most of the people don't have TV also. So nowadays this kind of electronic appliances they purchase. And जो हमने सेफ यूनिवर्सिटी के साथ जो स्टडी किया था, उसमें हमने फाइंडिंग से निकाले कि पीएमएवाई के जो भी घर बनते हैं उसमें क्या क्या चीजें होना जरूरी है. Of course, I would like to share that recently, I think 6 months back, the Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs, they invited Mahila Housing Trust to provide some kind of suggestion, because in all over India they invited 27 organizations and MHT was one of the organizations from 27, and we gave our suggestions, like as I mentioned कि जो ग्लासेस होते तो ग्लासेस किस तरह के होने चाहिए, विंडो टू वॉल रेशियो किस तरह का होना चाहिए. जैसे जो पुराने घर बनते थे उसमें हम रखते थे कि विंडो के बाहर एक छज्जा रखते थे. जो अभी के बिल्डर जो बनाते हैं, जो पीएमएवाई में बनते हैं, वो छज्जा वहां पर नहीं होता है. सो वो बहुत ही सिंपल है, सिर्फ आप एक छज्जा वहां पर लगाते हो, उससे भी जो बिल्डिंग का जो हीट होती है वो हीट उससे कम हो जाती है. तो ये जो पॉलिसी इन्फ्लुएंस के जो पॉइंट्स है वो महिला हाउसिंग ट्रस्ट कम्युनिटी को तो बताता है, बट हम चाहते हैं कि गवर्नमेंट में जाकर भी हम सजेशन देते, ताकि आगे जो पीएमएवाई में जो कंस्ट्रक्शन होने वाला है तो उसमें ये सारी चीजों का ध्यान रखा जाए.
Sure. I think it's a lot of very good information. Just to put it very succinctly, so she spoke about one of the schemes that's across India. I'm talking about millions and millions of houses here, where I think it's so important that communities understand about this, the innovation that they're bringing at home. I mean, it could be as simple as putting an extra layer below or just changing the roof materials, etc. So because of the changes in their households, that the changes have really been seen. So Aaron, I think it might be interesting for you. I'll ask Bhavna to share this data as well. So they did a recent study with one of the universities here, where they've actually looked at this urban slum housing, where the similar solutions were implemented, like they did in school also, but obviously with a little bit of contextualized innovation, where they've actually seen a lot of improvement in terms of heat stress, in terms of family, the quality of time that they spent on, at homes, etc. So now that study was actually received well, and the government of India actually invited MHT for this whole, I think the national level urban, housing planning meeting that she suggested. So it really gives an example, I think a very good example of how one innovation or one set of innovations done in one city could be picked up by the government. I'm not just talking about schools, but also connected to the urban housing as well, because these kids go back to these houses as well. So I think it's really taken up together, both urban housing as well as schools. Really, I think helps in scaling these innovations at the country level. I mean, I think if you're scaling it in India, you really can't scale it anywhere else, considering the sort of the difficulty in the structures that we have here. So yeah.
Shripathi, I would would like to give you an example. One of the example of it is related to energy, but of course energy is interlinked with heat also. In PMAY building, there is a because previously there was no provision of solar rooftop. I think few years, I think 3 or 4 years back, government announced that in all PMAY scheme there should be a 5 kilowatt solarization compulsory they have to do. But हमने ये देखा था कि maximum people they use that 5 kilowatt for common facilities like street lights, generally street lights. But actually these vertical buildings they get high electricity bill more than 25 to 50,000 actually. Just because of their water pumping, because they use motor. So in particular in Ahmedabad, one PMAY scheme, there is 120 households. There we have there we have installed the solar rooftop, 15 kilowatt solar rooftop. Previously, they were getting around 80 to 85,000 electricity bill per month. Now it's decreased and now only around 10,000 rupees they are getting. So
Wow.
now we have also asked government that you should increase the solarized instead of 5 kilowatt. Now government has recently announced that 20 kilowatt, but still there should be around 30 to 35 kilowatt solarization need to be done in this PMAY scheme.
Brilliant. I think just put in one line, there was a amazing reduction in terms of their electricity expenses because of the sustainable solutions, which I think addresses Yolande what you asked about how it's contributing to the communities as well. I mean, that's a significant reduction of their expenses, considering these, sort of when you go with the sustainable solutions which are decentralized and I think it's applicable to schools as well. I mean, schools also have like huge electricity bills coming in. So how do you build schools which are very well ventilated? You use more efficient lights and use decentralized solar panels so that it's a reduction for government's expenses. I think that's when with the governments realize, I'm sure, I think it's going to be scalable. So thank you so much. Over to you, Yolande.
This is excellent. Two more questions and from Tali and Linda and Estelle. Can you talk a little bit more about the impacts on children's attendance in school? Do you see an impact on learning outcomes and maybe even health? And who are you training? What kind of interventions include training key people in the school, in the community, or do you have to train others? So if you could answer that, and then I'll ask Aron to bring in the research part of it, if there's any of the data.
Sure.
into you.
Go ahead, Bhavna. Thank you.
Yeah, directly actually we are not going to the school and we are asking or we are doing discussion with children most of the time, but our focus areas are settlements. And when in summer also, when our field team they do visit of slum settlements, they see maximum children are they are in their home only. Then we ask why that your children are not going into school. Then said no, just because the temperature is around 45-46 degree, just because of heat wave, I don't want to send my children into the school. It's good to they stay here because I am worried about their health actually. If they will go to school exposed to heat, then of course there will be some health expenses. I need to take care of him. I need to take him to the doctor and some other expenses, because we have seen that just because of extreme heat, their productivity increase. So there is less income and more expenditure. So that is why they take care of their children also. They try their best to minimize their expenditure, especially in summer.
I think, Aron, there's a very nice nuance over there. When we are talking about finding the data in schools, what they have done is their data collection point was not schools, but in communities. They went to these settlements and they saw that a lot of kids were not going to school because of extreme heat conditions. And next time when they actually went and saw, because after school was built, there were less kids at settlements because their the lens that they actually wore was through the communities. Now, not many kids are in these, and some of the settlements that Bhavna is talking about, these communities walk in very very harsh infrastructure places, maybe construction working and farms that we are talking about. So it's even worse for kids to be there rather than being in school. But what families think is, okay, I mean, sending in school, walking so many kilometers in these heat conditions may not be good for the kid. But right now, after these solutions, I think the way that they looked at it, there was not much of presence of kids in the community. So I think it's an interesting way of looking at it, especially in some of these communities we're talking about.
Excellent. Aron, do you want to add anything in terms of evidence, data, research on the issue of retention, access to education, even community
Yes.
involvement?
Sorry, I realized my
You just froze.
Yeah, I
We
think
have
it's
lost
Is
you.
of
Oh, there you are. You're back,
well, although I don't see anybody's video.
Aron. Oh, we lost you. See, too much heat in California. Not heat, California is hit by these atmospheric rivers right now. Well, all right, maybe Aron will get back to us. Uzma, I hope the question, community understanding climate and education, was answered. Aron, you're back?
Am I?
we
Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead now.
Great. Okay. Yes. Our issue in California right now is too much water, not heat. So there is evidence about attendance effects, certainly from extreme temperatures, both hot and cold. And what we saw from one of those studies, the only study I read on this, is that it doesn't matter what's happening in the school. It's I think the process of getting to the school that really matters. Again, that's in schools that aren't that hot. So obviously when it's 45 in the classroom, that's its own good public health reason to have kids maybe not go to school. Or a really big disincentive for parents to send kids. So I think at extreme temperatures, we might see different effects. Even at lower temperature ranges, we see kids are less likely to end up in school just when it's a little too hot or a little too cold. We see both of those things. And that's where when you think about the whole, home to however they're getting to school pathway, all those exposures become important to study also.
You are on mute. Oh, yes, you are on mute.
Thank you, Bhavna. Why do we always do this? So we're running out of time now and there are more questions, but this is great. What I'm taking away from this is that this is an ecosystem, right? We cannot look, education, when is the last time you saw education stakeholders talk to the housing ministry? I've never seen that before. So, we talk to our own choir. So let's open this up to an ecosystem. When we talk about implementation, when we talk about research, the solutions that Bhavna and Shripathi talked about apply to schools, they apply to teachers, they apply to parents and communities, but they also apply to governments. And the policy and regulations that you mentioned are really key and good models for us. So thank you. Aron pointed to the fact that we still have a long ways to go in terms of getting research, but he also pointed to the details of it all. The 1 degree Celsius, what difference does it make? A day of testing, a non-day of testing, a day when kids come, then, I was too hot to get a good performance on my test. Well, what does that mean? So all of that. To remind you, GREEN is a network, and we're here to share our knowledge, but also come up with solutions when we can and pathways for more research and more data. So if you have ideas on how GREEN as a network can help for this agenda, please put in the chat or put it in an email. This is what we're about. Check out GREEN again on the website. Amplify it, send more people to it. Right now, we're still very public about this. In a few months, we're going to have to shut the membership because there were so many of them. So please take advantage of that. We will share, the recording will be available. We will share the PowerPoint as well. So thank you, Bhavna. Thank you, Shripathi. Thank you, Aron. We're in so many parts of the world. Keep your eyes open on GREEN. And I'm not going to say stay warm, but stay cool and stay healthy, all of you. Thank you.
Thank you
And
so
thank
much.
you all
Yeah.
for your kind words.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks.
Bye. Bye.